All right, hello everybody. Welcome, good afternoon, good evening if you're in Ireland, and good morning wherever this finds you. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. We've been waiting for our participants to arrive, and as you see at the bottom of the screen, it continues to grow. We're in the 60s. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, and thank you for this taking part in this CWR Academy webinar, simply titled Podcasting. I'm Robert Cogswell. I'm the Director of Communications for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. I'm a member of CWR's Education Committee, and I am your moderator today. So if you're anything like me, you're thinking the community that you work for has an amazing charism, you and others believe in their mission, and you want to know, how can I let more people know about it? How can I let the people who do know about us engage more deeply with our mission? Is there perhaps an untapped media channel I can use? Maybe I should give podcasting a try. So on a recent survey, about 80% of you said that you're not involved in creating podcasts, but you want to learn more. And the survey also indicated you really want to know everything. So we'll do our best. You've come to the right place. We've assembled a panel for you today featuring some seasoned pros and courageous newcomers to share their expertise and experience. Our panelists include Maxine Kollasch, IHM from A Nun's Life Ministry, who many of you know, and she actually produces a few podcast titles. Natalia Shilaimon, a comm specialist from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, who will talk about Sister Story Lab. Julia Walsh, a sister from the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, has a wonderful title for her podcast called Messy Jesus Business. I love that. And DeAnna Dailey, who produces a podcast for the Benedictine Sisters and Oblates at St. Gertrude's Monastery in Cottonwood, Idaho. So that's the order we will actually go in with those four panelists. Just to give you a quick housekeeping, what we'll do is each panelist will have about 5 to 7 minutes where they will share their experience. We can go ahead and take questions. So go ahead and look at that the bottom tray of your screen and use that Q&A feature. We might have a lot of questions today. We're not really sure, but we'll have to see how it goes. We will only address a few questions at a time during the panelist presentations, so that way we can make sure that we hear from all the panelists. We don't want to have all the questions up front and then not get to everybody. So we'll save most of the Q&A for the end. We want to make sure that you hear from all of the presentations, and we should have ample time afterwards to field your questions and engage in discussion about starting podcasts and keeping it going, and specialty topics like how do you get the subject matter and select guests and distribute it, what mistakes are there to avoid, and more. So I think we're ready to get started. It's my privilege to welcome Sister Maxine Kollasch, or as she's often known to many of you, just Max. We serve together on the CWR board, and I can tell you from experience, she is incredibly generous and encouraging in helping our fellow CWR members expand their reach through this media. So Max, take it away.
Thank you, Rob, for that introduction, and it truly is a joy to be on the CWR board. I would encourage anybody who's thinking about board service. I mean, that's the board to be on. So a little note on that. And it's great to be with all of you to talk about certainly one of my favorite topics, which is podcasting. And I'll give you a little bit of context about A Nun's Life first. We began as an online ministry. We're a digital first ministry, as they say, in 2006. And we started as a blog. And at about that time, podcasting was newly emerging. So it was something we were very interested in. And it just so happens that we started the ministry at the same time Sister Julie Vieira and I, my co-founder, professed vows as an IHM sister. So it was that deep joy of our own vocation that inspired us to go to the internet and to reach out to people and help them discover and grow in their vocation too. And that remains the mission of A Nun's Life today. So the types of content that we produce now, I mentioned we started with a blog, but now we have blogs, podcasts, and videos. And across all of these content forms, we have the same goal, and that is to talk to people about vocations, doing so through the lens of religious life, which is the lens that we have. So what we want to do is bring that tradition of religious life, that centuries-old tradition, rich in wisdom about prayer and spirituality and community and ministry. We want to bring that into conversation with people's everyday lives because we believe it will help them discover and grow in their vocation. Currently, and certainly you can hop on over to the website while I'm talking, nunslife.org, and sort of look around. Currently, we have 4 podcasts, 3 of which are the major podcasts, and we do full episodes of those, and each is about 45 minutes to an hour long. And we produce 1 full episode monthly. And then we also do what are called random nun clips. And these are taken from the full episodes, so that if we have an Ask Sister podcast, we may take some random nun clips from that, and we'll run those in between the major episodes so that we have a fairly constant flow of podcasts. Ask Sister, I mentioned that before, was our very first podcast. We started experimenting with podcasts in 2008 and came out with Ask Sister in 2009, so it's been around for a little while. And basically what we do are we respond to listener questions. We've done many of them, especially early on. We did them live, so we would take questions from the chat room. We would take questions that people would email us. And we still do that. We do more of them recorded at this point in time. It's easier in a number of ways, one of them being scheduling. So we've had any number of guest sisters with us on the podcast. I am the host of that podcast. So Ask Sister is one of our main podcasts. The Mother House Road Trip, and I think a number probably of your congregations we've been to. We've done 40 Mother House Road Trips since we started that in 2013. And basically what we do is we pack up our mobile studio and we go to a mother house or other central place of ministry, and we do a live streaming podcast. So these are live audio and video. We have a couple of guest sisters at the table with us from that congregation. And then in the audience, we have high school students or college students, associates, oblates, any number of folks. And we take questions live during the broadcast and do our best to respond to them. We often say to people, we will guarantee a response, but maybe not an answer. So one of the things that I think our podcasts are known for is just being human and authentic. We don't have any production delay time. What you get is what you get on these live podcasts. So I would like to say that has probably helped deepen my spirit of humility many times, but also of joy. So sometimes you just never know what's going to happen or what people will say, and that's part of the whole delight of it, and I mean excitement of it as well. So Mother House Road Trips, we have currently that is on hold, and we're going to look to see what the future will bring in regard to the pandemic, because of course traveling is very challenging these days. So the third major podcast that we do is called In Good Faith, and it is an interview style podcast as opposed to a question and answer kind of podcast. And that had been on hiatus for a while, but early this year we started reactivating it, and so we have some new episodes of In Good Faith. We have a wide variety of guests on that podcast. We've had Elizabeth Johnson, Jim Martin, Bob Barron, Barbara Reed, a number of folks speaking from their experience of being a theologian, whatever their background is. And then, of course, I mentioned the random nun clips. These are short segments from the full episodes. And we have a wide variety of these. And because they are a single topic or a single subject, you can look across the random nun clips and really get a good sense of the character of a nun's life ministry. We deal with serious subjects and serious intent. but there's also a sense of warmth, a sense of welcoming, and truly a sense of humor as well. In regard to podcast production and storage, we use a podcast service called Libsyn. It's a hosting service. It's sort of like your website hosting service. So our podcasts are stored there, and there's a number of these kinds of services. And it's the service that can send the podcast out to, for example, Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, radio.com. So we're on many of those kinds of distribution. We distribute to many of those kinds of platforms through Libsyn. And then let's see, we also have an app, and it's the A Nun's Life Ministry. It's specifically for podcasts. And so that allows us, of course, to have people just subscribe and automatically get the app or get the podcast on the app, just as they can with Apple or Google or any of the other subscriptions. And then let's see, some of our numbers. People usually find those interesting. So we have worked with sisters, hundreds of sisters from many congregations around the world. Our listeners come from 175 countries, men and women of all ages and all walks of life, although our podcast listeners tend to skew much younger, 30 and under. And we have had well over 1.5 million downloads since we began podcasting. So I would just give you that as sort of a sketch and a context. If you'd like to ask questions, you'll have that as context. Some things to consider based on doing this for a fairly long time as podcasters go. I would suggest, and I do this myself even now, to immerse myself in podcast culture. It's a very different culture than like every online platform has a somewhat different culture, and certainly podcasting is like that. Get connected with an online community that can share information. I would highly recommend one of them, which is called She Podcasts, and they categorize their comments so that you can find information very easily. What kind of technology to use, what about formats, what about cover art, just about any topic you can find there. I would also recommend, as part of that podcast culture, listen to as many different podcasts as you can, from the highly produced to the barely produced, because they're a great source of ideas. And I would just say, one of my favorite recent podcasts, and I'm not a big Dolly Parton fan, but I gotta say, I have fallen in love with Dolly Parton's America. It is one of those highly produced shows, but it's like just really, really good. Second quick thing I would recommend is, especially if you're in the early stages, just starting to develop a podcast, pay a lot of attention to your format. That is going to be your show format, is your public face to the world. And it also is directly tied to your production costs. Your format is going to determine how many guests have to get scheduled, how much audio editing is involved, what kind of technology you're going to use for recording. So it's something you're going to want to spend a fair amount of time with for a lot of reasons. But the most important thing of all is go with where your energy is, go with where your passion is. If you love your podcast, I guarantee you, your listeners are going to love it too. And it's going to be that kind of energy that can keep you podcasting over the long haul. So with that, happy podcasting, and I turn it back over to you, Rob.
All right, thanks, Max. We did get one question I want to point out to all of our participants. If you're following the chat, Brian's doing a great job of dropping in all these links for like Libsyn and some of the examples that you're using. We did have a question from Anna Gonzalez about spelling out the link for She Podcasts, and that's also in the chat. So it's shepodcasts.com.
And if I can add, Rob, that is, there's a Facebook group that you have to be accepted into it. There's several thousand people who are on it, podcasters. So just if you go to the Facebook group, they'll admit you in.
All right, fantastic. Well, we're watching that Q&A, so that there's not many right now, but we imagine some more will come. And oh, we have an open one here. Okay, another one from Anna. How much time should a newbie plan for planning, recording, and editing a podcast? How time intensive is it? Can you do it on the side? Is it a new ministry? The answer is yes, right?
Yeah, yeah. To start wherever you're comfortable starting. I mean, we did not have any. I mean, we had, first of all, no idea what we were doing when we started. But start where you feel comfortable, and you can always grow. But take your time. Especially if you're a team of one, you're going to be doing a lot of learning along the way. So I would say start wherever you are.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and then we'll move on and kind of hold on to some of the questions that are coming up along the way. We will try and get to every question that we can today, but just one. What do you use to edit your podcasts? Do you have a recommendation?
I've used a number of softwares. I use right now Adobe Audition. Audacity, which is also an Adobe product, is a free version of that. There's many different softwares out there at different costs and price points. So Audacity would be a great one to start with.
Okay. All right, we'll keep those questions coming. We will try and get to all of them, but for now, we are going to jump to our next panelist. So actually just a few doors down from me is Natalia Shilaimon, who we hit the jackpot hiring her recently. So she could have said no to doing this panel, but she jumped into the deep end anyway. So Natalia, what can you tell us about Sister Story Lab?
Hi, Rob. Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. I'm Natalia Shilaimon, everyone. I'm a communications specialist here at the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, and I'm just really grateful to be here with you all. And thank you, Maxine. It was so nice to hear what you had to say about podcasts. I'm definitely implementing that all since I'm a newbie at podcasts as well as everyone else here listening. I've been working here for a little bit over 3 months now. Just a disclaimer, I've only recorded one podcast. So I'm a lot like you guys. I'm in a similar place as you if this is what you guys want to do. And thankfully, I've learned so much about digital media, thanks to Rob, my colleague Elizabeth. I don't know if she's listening. And more specifically, I've learned a lot about how podcasts can be just a simple way to connect to our audience and discuss a wide range of topics using our greatest asset, a sister. Our podcast is called Sister Story Lab, and we recently started recording season 3. And here's what I can tell you about Sister Story Lab and where I picked it up. They started the Sister Story podcast, Sister Story Lab podcast. Sorry, guys, I'm just a little bit nervous. I keep seeing the number rising. They started the Sister Story Lab podcast because they were listening to a lot of podcasts during the time, which is a couple of years ago, I believe. And it's not because a lot of sisters are listening to podcasts. As Maxine said, the demographics are like under 30s, like up to 30s. And they also thought it might attract a newer and perhaps a younger audience, and which is what I believe it's doing. And it's just new territory to stretch in. Here in Southern California, you guys all know we are driving a lot and our commutes are a little bit longer than 30 minutes. So I feel like people are listening to content while they're driving, and it's just a way for us to experiment with new content, especially since here in California, we're always on the road and we're listening to the radio. So a podcast is just a way for us to expand with our content and really grow our audience to a younger demographic. When they launched, they did seasons of about 10 episodes. So just like your favorite show, it's like 10 episodes. It's kind of basically the same thing, where we really want to expand it that way. And it just doesn't have to be like the same topic all the time. It can be really a broad range of topics, which is great, especially during like 2020, where everyone is going through like the most dramatic thing ever right now. There's COVID, the election, we experienced a great deal of racism this year. So just things like that is like ways that we can branch out in our topics and stuff. So let's see. The first season started in July, which I was not here for. And things got as crazy as they are now with time and stuff. So they only did one episode in July, and then November and December, they did episodes just like kind of like what we're starting to do now. Our format is more like twice a month. So twice in November, twice in December, and then we're just gonna take a short break in January. And then again, we're gonna start 2 episodes per month. So I think this is like a great way to do it because you don't want to overwhelm your audience. So doing 2 episodes a month and then another 2 and then just taking a short break. So it could be like a season, just like your shows again. Every Netflix show, it's not like overwhelmed, like where you can like, obviously you're just gonna binge a few shows and then you need a little break and then you can keep watching again when they come out with a new season. So that's kind of how I look at it, especially since I'm always keeping up with shows that way. It's basically the same with a podcast. Again, the content is broad, but since we want to focus on things that our audience might look at, you want to focus it on the times is what I like to say. So just focusing it on what's going on in the world today and in the United States, even locally, I think will really help your audience listen and support your podcast. For the first season, when I wasn't here, they did a bird's eye view, high level of what we do here at the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. So everything was kind of broad. And I think that really helped the audience learn more about our congregation and what they do at the Sisters of St. Joseph. So I think that was a great way to introduce everyone really. For season 2, it was still pretty broad. It was about the ministries. And then they did get into a couple of specific events and stories, which again, I think is perfect. And it's perfect for anyone starting, especially like in like a format like ours. So, and after that, there were pretty long gaps between the seasons, and that was for different reasons. Again, I'm not like exactly sure what the reasons were, but for now, we want a more sustainable model. So that's why we're gonna do the 2 each month and then breaks. So it's more consistent and people can keep up with that. It's a lot easier for people to know exactly when we're gonna start recording and stuff, so. And for our specific calendar, we're gonna have May off in the summer, and which is like June through August, which is, I think, again, good because I don't know how many people really want to listen to a podcast in the summer while they're trying to hang out. And then in September, we'll finish it off with 2 podcasts in October and all the way through December. And after that, I just think it's pretty important to brainstorm a lot of topics, especially because we are all trying to represent our brands. So not everyone's really going to listen to what you have to say if it's not really representing your brand. So I think it's super important to brainstorm all the time because things are ever changing. So you can't just be talking about something that's not really related to what you represent at the congregation or wherever you are trying to podcast from, because you want to draw in people that would listen to whatever you're trying to expose them to. And after that, since those topics are likely going to be really heavy, you're probably going to want to counter program that. So much lighter topics like simple interview style stories with a sister. People love learning about the sisters, and I know that's what they want to see the most. So just having a lighter topic like that once a month at least is a way to kind of draw in like what you're really about here at the Sisters of St. Joseph or wherever you are. That's really our main goal, is to get our audience to learn about the sisters. At the end of the day, even though sisters are fighting for social justice and change and stuff, you really want to draw them back to what the sisters are really here for, and stuff like that too. And like Sister Maxine said, she uses Libsyn, which is what we also use here at the Sisters of St. Joseph. It hosts episodes, so it's a great tool that basically sends your recording to any site or app. So for Android, there's the app Stitcher, which a lot of people use. I know my parents have Androids, so they use Stitcher. And for iPhone users, the typical iPhone podcast app. And they're all really user-friendly tools, and it's so easy for people to listen to podcasts. That's what I think makes it great. It's easier than YouTube even, so a lot of people know how to use YouTube. They can definitely click play on those podcast links. So yeah, I really believe the podcast can help expand your, definitely reach what you're trying to do, especially now we're all trying to find ways to connect virtually, especially because that's all we can do now. But if you have any questions, sorry, I rambled a little bit because I got nervous, but if you have any questions, I am so happy to answer. You can email me or just Q&A me right here. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Natalia. We do have a number of questions coming in.
I see that now.
And yeah, you can answer, or really all the panelists can chime in just by unmuting. We'll take a few of them right now. One is, what is the season of a podcast? Is that a certain theme or time period or number of episodes?
It's a time period. So right now I'm working on season 3. A season is like a typical show that you would watch. It has like a few episodes. For us specifically, it's 10 episodes, which I think is good because consider it like the year length. So 10 episodes per season, 8 episodes per season, however you're comfortable would be awesome.
All right, and Cecilia asks, how much is a reasonable budget for production?
Honestly, you can use your phone. I have used my phone for other things, not specifically a podcast, but your phone is an incredible tool. What I use is here. Oh, sorry guys. This is called the Blue. It's kind of on the pricier side. It's probably around $230. Let me get you guys the link for that so you guys can see it. But that's an amazing tool, and it's been here since I started. So I think it's definitely affordable and it does the job.
And we've got, I think we'll have some equipment and gear recommendations for you. You're following the podcast to share with the people who are attending here. So.
Yes.
All right.
Can I add one quick note about
Sure.
Recording? There's also cloud-based recording. I use one called Zencaster, and it sort of works like Zoom, but it's much higher quality audio. So Zencaster is something you might want to check out too.
All right. Thanks, Max. We're going to move forward a little bit. I know there's still quite a few questions, but we want to make sure we get to all of our panelists. So up next is Julia Walsh. We're jumping across the country to La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I am really looking forward to hearing about messy Jesus business. And I also want to listen to your latest episode with Father James Martin. So I'm looking forward to that. So Julia, tell us about your podcasting experience.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm actually in Chicago, but yes, I'm a Franciscan sister of Perpetual Adoration, and our community is based in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So there's a little backstory on Messy Jesus Business. The blog started 10 years ago and just kind of began as a creative side project for me, as probably a way to process my ministerial experiences at the time. And I was reluctant to begin blogging because I didn't know if I could sustain it, but one of the sisters in my community encouraged me and said that she would help out as a guest blogger, and some others would as well. And I've really been learning a lot as I go. And as my ministry life and vocational journey has evolved, I found myself in a number of interesting conversations and realized I was developing relationships with people who I was very fortunate to be spending time with them, and that was a privilege. And I think part of my motivation for starting the podcast was because I think probably because I'm a sister and a Franciscan by vocation, I don't want to cling to anything, even the relationships that are in conversations that I have with people that feel so energizing and life-giving. I want to share those things as well. So the brand of Messy Jesus Business, the blog, which turned into the podcast earlier this year, and we launched in, I think, May of this year, of 2020. Maybe April, I don't remember anymore. Anyway, but the brand is really about radical discipleship. And so, radical gospel living, and we include things about activism, about arts, about nonviolence, about the works of mercy, service on the margins, living in community, and contemplation. So truly, what is the ecumenical goodness of the gospel? And it's not just exclusively about being Franciscan or about being a sister, but I've always had the spirit and brand of Messy Jesus Business of it being very broad. And so I wanted to uplift certain voices. I wanted to uplift, to share these conversations. I wanted to contribute to the conversation, and I really wanted to evangelize in the truest sense of the word, of proclaiming the good news of the gospel. And I could see, I've been a podcast consumer for a few years, and I get my news from the podcasts I listen to Up First from NPR and many other NPR podcasts. I have listened to On Being, for example, and some things from American Public Media, To the Best of Our Knowledge. So really more like radio show type podcast. It tends to be the ones I'm following, and have kind of influenced my my vision and what I was hoping for when I was forming this. And so what happened, how did I get this started? After thinking and praying about it for a good while, is I realized I didn't have a clue. I didn't know how to start. I didn't have any tech skills. I didn't know anything about audio editing. I didn't know anything about equipment. And I applied for a grant through Giving Voice, which is an organization for sisters under age 50, just to kind of get some money to learn how to do podcasting, as well as to get a mic. I'll show off my beautiful blue microphone mic as well, my Yeti. So there we are. So that's what I used my grant money for. And I ended up to learn the skills. I just turned to some friends who were already experienced podcasters and asked them to I asked them for a suggestion about a workshop. And then they said, oh, we'll teach you. And so then they really became my teachers. And I really also did a lot of learning through just watching of YouTube's research, experimenting, and playing around with it. But eventually I figured out that the thing I needed to do is, because my blog, Messy Jesus Business, is a WordPress website, and I wanted the blog and the podcast to go together. And WordPress has a relationship with thing called Blueberry, and that's a little tricky it's not like it sounds. So I'm going to just show you briefly on the screen here. This is the Blueberry, so it's spelled Blubrry, okay? And then through their you have to buy a subscription, and through the subscription you get information. They help with the distribution, they help with a lot of the tech support. I frequently have tech troubles, and they're right there, very responsive. So that's very nice. And then the thing I did for audio is I basically just started interviewing my guests on Zoom, recording the Zoom audio, and then uploading that through simple drag and drop right over into GarageBand. And that's how I figured out how to do audio. I don't know, there's probably lots of other ways to do it, but this is the way I taught myself how to do it. So you can see, you know, this is the start of one of my episodes. I got my theme song, the introduction, and this yellow line is the volume. So I kind of faded the music away when the introduction audio came in, and then the different components all have a different track, and it's you know, requires a lot of work. It's very technical. I was not prepared for as many hiccups as there actually were in the audio, which is so, it takes a lot of patience, which is not one of my greatest virtues. So, I was optimistic when I got started, like I tend to be about a lot of things. I thought, oh, maybe podcasting is just something like maybe I wanted to just do it twice a month, every other week. I figured I'd have a blog episode one week and a podcast episode the next, and every other, build it that way. And I figured, okay, maybe about a half day a week when I do a podcast, you know, I'll interview them and then it'll just take a couple hours to edit and air. Yeah, sounds good. It's probably more like about a day's worth of work per episode when you add in the editing and production and all the kind of text stuff on the background. I don't want to talk too much, but let me just say that those are my major setbacks. The other things that I was surprised about were the expenses, and in order to put the podcast onto my website, I had to pay extra fees, and then the distribution Blueberry thing has fees as well. So all of a sudden now it's about $400 total of fees that I'm paying per year. So it's not like extreme, but it's more than I had in my personal budget, and this is just a personal side project as a sister. So you know how it is, sisters and money. Okay. Yeah, so then I had to ask for help as I realized I didn't have the money and I didn't have the time. And I really turned to my community's communication office, and we did some troubleshooting, and they were very generous and helped provide someone to assist me with the audio editing and the distribution. And really, so now at this point, I schedule and still do the interviewing, the hosting, and my dear friend, lovely assistant, Cherish, does the editing in the background. So, and the distribution. She writes up the show notes and gets that all out. So I don't know how long that'll last, but that's the arrangement we have for this time. And my community also figured out another way to help support the ministry. So financially and otherwise. So that's really helpful. Yeah, and as Rob mentioned, I've had a number of guests since it's ecumenical in spirit and it's really just about gospel living in general. I've tried to not limit it to only Christians or sisters, or only Catholics or sisters, and have had lots of different types of Christians, authors, activists. I've had nurses, pastors, theologians, and even my younger blood sister, who is a food service director in Iowa. I thought, oh, let me talk to her about what it's like to really feed the hungry during COVID. And she's a farmer. So I thought, oh, that'd be interesting. And then, yeah, Father James Martin. The first episode, one of the first episodes I did was with one sister in my community, and we talked about our charism and vocational discernment. And I plan to do more episodes like that as well. But I have a long list of dreams, and then I just kind of make a schedule. Okay, according to what's going on in the world right now, and what sort of things people are hungry for, who does it make sense for me to request an interview for next? So I'm always trying to have about to work a couple episodes ahead. So my Father James Martin episode, which came out 2 weeks ago, was actually recorded mid-October. So there was I work about that far ahead in the recording and the interviews, and that gives production time and distribution time. All right, so thank you so much. I look forward to learning more. I know I can learn a lot from this crowd, and it's good to be with you all. Peace.
All right, thanks, Julie. I do have a specific question for you.
Okay.
Lori asks, is Blueberry a WordPress plugin?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. And then maybe this is for all of our panel. What is the best length of time for a podcast?
It's a good question. You know, I based it on what I listen to, and noticed that there's a lot of things that keep my own attention, and I have attention deficit, so I think disorder. So I think what keeps me engaged and has attention is probably what I go to as my best examples. And anyway, so I noticed for me, it's things about 30 to 40 minutes. I tend to stick with. I think that's if they're even shorter, fine, but it depends on your format. And I really wanted to have deeper conversations with guests, not just introduce them. So I try to have interviews that are about 30 minutes, 30 to 40. And then I also follow those up with kind of a time of prayer, which I call a contemplative moment. So that's just part of the structure. And then it ends up, each episode's about 45.
All right, thank you. Well, we're going to keep it moving because this hour is really going by fast. And we still have another panelist to get to, and that's DeAnna Dailey. So we're headed to Cottonwood, Idaho for DeAnna for our panel. And actually, I was noticing, DeAnna, that a lot of your podcasts were shorter. They were like around 15 minutes or so, I think is what I observed. So anyway, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story with your podcasting for St. Gertrude's Monastery.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm DeAnna Dailey, and I am coming from a little bit different perspective, I think, than a lot of panelists and a lot of you that are watching as well. I am a contractor, so I just work for the monastery, and I was hired really to do marketing consultation. So I was doing a lot of stuff around social media and email funnels and stuff like that. It was really a series of happenstance that led to me connecting with Teresa Henson, who's the creative director there at St. Gertrude's. And so I'm coming from a place actually of complete ignorance of Catholicism and religious orders. And I absolutely just happened to make this connection and had a lot of experience to bring in terms of marketing and particularly marketing for nonprofits. So so I feel like I come to this from this completely outside perspective, and often feel like really out of my depth with the culture of a monastery. But I also feel like that has given me this amazing opportunity to really try to impress upon the monastery, and I hope to communicate this to you too, that your audience is so much bigger than you think it is. And I think Max has done a great job of tapping into that and can vouch for that, you know, the 1.5 million downloads. And so like when I was looking through the survey results that you guys all filled out ahead of time, you know, I saw a lot of people are really interested in getting yourselves in front of, getting into the view of young women who might be in a discernment process, which I think is awesome. That's a great way to use a podcast. But I think there's so much bigger audience that I think it could really be of benefit from a marketing perspective to, since that's where I'm coming from, to connect with. We all out here are like fascinated with like everything. Like, what do you eat for breakfast? Like, people want a podcast where you just tell me what you have for breakfast every morning, really. So like, there's no limit to what you can do and what is marketable and interesting because of the context, that the framework that you're speaking from. So that is an intro to who I am. And I have some slides to share here real quick, mostly to help keep me on track, but let me share this. Okay, so why make a podcast? There's a bunch of reasons. People have talked about this already. One of the big ones is I think a lot of you already are involved in managing your social media, getting out content for your blog, for your Facebook page, that sort of thing. Making a podcast is just a great way to have a whole bunch of content to work from. Like Max was mentioning, they cut up little clips from from the larger podcast to use for smaller things. You can also use that for all sorts of posting, just simple quotes on social media. They're great for creating, taking a quote from a sister and making it into a little meme graphic to share on social media. So it gives you a huge body of content. It's actually really easy. One of the really common things that virtual assistants do, if you have a budget to hire an assistant, is actually just listen to your podcast and respin like a whole month's worth of your other social media content based on the content of that podcast. So that's one really good reason for doing it. Oral history is actually the main reason that we started doing the Monastery of St. Gertrude podcast. It actually came up in a conversation with Teresa that somewhere in the attic, there were some old audio files of some interviews with some past sisters. And I just thought that was such a valuable resource that just needed to be shared. Like the oral history of the people who've been involved in these communities for hundreds of years is really important. So those audio files ended up not really being high enough quality to share in a public way, but that was the seed of, there's unlimited content available in this community to share with people that people want to know and want to hear about. And so that is the specific focus of the St. Gertrude's podcast. There's also, as a lot of people already mentioned in the surveys, and also the panelists have already mentioned, just in terms of outreach and community, it's just another channel to reach people. Also ministry, like Messy Jesus Business is a great example of just being able to share with your community what your specific ministry is. I haven't seen anybody mention revenue generation. Since we've got this marketing framework, that is, that's definitely something that you can do with your podcast. You can connect with ads and actually be sponsored, have ads in your podcast. There are ways to do this that are not disruptive and don't feel like people are going to need to like mute your commercials in the middle of your podcast. There are graceful ways to incorporate sponsorship ads. And then there's also the St. Gertrude's Monastery didn't want to include ads, which is also totally fine. But we do include just a request for donations at the end of each podcast. It's super subtle, and I don't think it feels disruptive or anything. But they do track donations that come from that request, and you do get people who are just like, yes, this brings value to my life. It's a little bit more like the public radio format, where you just say, hey, we're producing this content for free, but if it brings value to you, please consider making a donation. I just included here's a recommendation, and other people have mentioned this too. Just listen to a lot of podcasts. Here's 3 of my favorites right now: Radiolab, 99% Invisible, and The Illusionist. They're all fairly highly produced. The Illusionist is a little more casual, but has been moving to more highly produced. But like Max said, it's just great to just listen to podcasts. And so if you wanted somewhere to start, that's a good place to start. What should your podcast be about? It should be about whatever you want. But there is no wrong thing. So, but I saw even in some of the Q&As, you've asked some questions about this, short form versus long form. So long form example, the Tim Ferriss podcast. He interviews, it's a single person that he interviews. His podcasts are often 2 or more hours long for a single episode. There's these massively long podcasts. I listen to them on road trips. Or you can listen to them over time, versus the short stuff podcast, which is just little, 5 or 10 minute, maybe 15-minute clips. For St. Gertrude's, we ended up going with this 15-minute format because for us, it felt like it made it much easier. I actually sit down and interview a sister for as long as we feel like talking, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. but it makes the editing so much easier if you don't have to go through and edit a whole hour-long chunk of audio. So to be able to just go through and pick 10 or 15 minutes. Also, you know, anytime somebody talks for like an hour and a half, there's pieces of it that are less interesting than others. So being able to just pick a 10 or 15-minute clip that really gets to the essence of, you know, that piece of the conversation, and then there's less to edit. So that felt like a good balance for us, but there's really no limit. You can make it as long or as short as you want. One of the short form pieces that's really common is language learning. People often do like a 5-minute Spanish podcast that is intended for people to just listen to like on their coffee break. So whatever you want. And then time limited versus ongoing. Another thing that I saw in the survey a lot was people being concerned about having enough content to keep going forever. And I want to impress upon you that that's not necessary. You can make a podcast that is just 5 episodes long and that's all you ever make. And that is great and valuable. A couple examples I made here. This American Life has been ongoing, you know, forever. If you know anything about podcasts, you've heard of This American Life probably. It's highly produced. It's been going on forever. Articles of Interest was a little spin-off podcast from 99% Invisible. I think it has 6 episodes. It was a super interesting, it's about fashion, which I'm not at all interested in fashion at all, but it was just like a super interesting 6 episodes that are just standalone. That's totally fine if you just have a particular issue that you want to address. The style, sort of more interview style versus more exploration style. So for instance, the Monastery of St. Gertrude podcast is just pure interview style. Like I just sit down with a sister. I even have the audio a little bit closer to the sister so that my words don't come out, you know, but it's mostly just us chatting and them having an opportunity to share their thoughts about whatever they want to talk about, mostly what we talk about, because the idea was the oral history is kind of their progression to where they are now in their life as a sister. The Rose Chat podcast, I wanted to present as like the exploratory style. It's an ongoing podcast that's been around for a long, long time, and all they talk about is roses, which is awesome, I think. And so I share that in part because it's just a kind of more exploratory style, and also because I want you to understand that there's no limit to the, like, you can choose as broad a topic as you want, or you can choose a very small topic and go deep. You could talk for years just about roses. And then there's the, you know, how processed is it, the one take versus highly edited. A great example of a one take version is Mrs. M's Curiosity Cabinet. I think she probably just records it with her laptop, like in her bedroom. I listen to it regularly. It's on my regular subscription podcast list because I just find her like personal take on what she's planting in the garden this year and what knitting project she's working on. She has a compelling accent. I think she's lovely to listen to. It's super minimalist. Versus Song Exploder is another podcast that I really enjoy that's really highly produced, where they take songs and take apart all the tracks and discuss how, you know, what the artist was thinking and stuff. And, you know, so that's just another one to look at that's highly edited. So to summarize, you can do whatever you want. If there's one takeaway that I hope you get from my piece of this presentation, is that you can really do whatever you want. This is a really accessible medium. In that vein, speaking of tech, this does not have to be complicated. You can make it complicated. You can go as big as if you want to spend $10,000 on equipment, you could, but I'm assuming that you don't want that, you don't have to. I have included here what you need. You need a decent microphone, you need a computer and some editing software, optionally a small quiet room, but you can do without that. And if you're going to do an interview style, you need something like Zoom, or like Maxine mentioned, Zencastr is a great option if you're interviewing people remotely. And then you need a distribution channel. And then on the right side of the screen here, I've just included my recommendations. This is what I use. There's tons of other solutions. And I think most of these things have been mentioned already. I also use the Blue Yeti microphone. The one that Natalia should use, the Pro, and I think Julia had the same one I have, just the regular non-pro one. I think they're like $150. I've had mine for several years, works great. I haven't used the Snowball, but that is their $50 kind of budget alternative. And I know many podcasters use that as well. So that is all you need for a mic. Then you need a computer with a USB plugin. If you're using a Blue mic, they use the USB plugin. And it has to be powerful enough to run editing software, which is not very powerful. And then I also use Audacity, which Maxine mentioned as the free version of the Adobe Pro version that she uses. GarageBand also works totally fine. And if you have a Mac, it probably came on there, so that's fine. And then I also use Libsyn, which at a basic level costs $5 a month as a distribution channel. So that is all you need for tech. It's really, really simple. Next steps, should you make a podcast? Yes, you should make a podcast. I want to impress upon you how easy this is. Get a microphone, anything. Use your iPhone earbuds, doesn't matter. Record some audio, record it on the voice memo on your phone, and load it up into Audacity. You might need a little bit of tech help if you're not super techy. You might need a tiny bit of tech help just downloading and starting Audacity, but then save it as an MP3 and email it to a friend. And now you have made a podcast. That's it. That's all it takes to make a podcast. Now, there's probably, you're going to do that and you're going to think like, oh, there's some things I want to improve before I actually put this out as a presentation of my brand. Great, do those things and then record it again. And and when you have it improved to the level that you feel like it's ready. And just a couple thoughts. You don't have to publish anything you don't like. Don't let this idea that this has to be perfect stop you from trying it. I again want to impress upon you that your perspective about the world and your place in it is interesting to others, and it's interesting to people outside of outside of religious orders, outside of Catholicism, even outside of Christianity. Like, people are really interested to hear what you have to say about whatever you have to say. Perfection is the enemy of the good. Just try to make something good. Don't make something perfect. And like Maxine said, this is the face of your brand. I want to encourage you to not get hung up on that. That if you decide, you know what, I'm going to start out making a podcast every week and it's going to be highly edited and it's going to be most amazing, and then you try that for a couple of weeks and it turns out that is not sustainable and you end up somewhere else, that's fine. If you decide, I'm going to make a podcast about social justice, this is super important, but then it turns out that all the people you interview actually want to talk about environmental conservation, then that's fine too. You can't actually foresee where you're going to end up when you start this process. So just make a podcast and see where it takes you. And that's what I have to offer. And I'm going to pass it back to Rob.
All right, thank you, DeAnna. You offered a lot. Thank you so much. And you know, this hour really flew by, and we could probably spend a lot more time talking about podcasting, but you know, we're past the top of the hour. I know we started a few minutes later as people were arriving, but I do want to assure our participants that we have been collecting, you know, the questions in the Q&A and the comments in the chat.